And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. I say welcome back because I know you were just listening to one of our other episodes and you wanted to come back for more. And we've got a lot more for you. We've got a great show for you today. This is the podcast that is about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And you guessed it, my guest today is a podcaster. You guys figure that out every time. You always crack my code. This is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. This is where we come together, we support each other, and we're here for the greater good. Folks, we have a great show today. All right, this is an awesome guy. He has a plethora of projects that I know he can't wait to tell you guys about. Please welcome to the program, Jeff Lippman, host of the Garden of Thought family of shows, and very regular and very excited guest on all sorts of wrestling shows, which I'm going to let him tell you about. And he's got a new one he's putting together, a little bit like The Bachelorette. I'm going to let him spring that on you too later on. So, Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you, Rory.
I appreciate you coming on. Thank you. Jeff, give everybody a little bit of idea, for who is Jeff Lipman? What is it you do? And hey, hit us, hammer us. What are these awesome shows you're talking about?
The details of my life are quite inconsequential. Very well. Where do I begin? My father was a relentlessly self-improving boulangerie owner from Belgium with a low grade. Sorry, that's Dr. Evil. I just figured start with a little comedy, and I do have that saved in my notes for such occasions. Um, in real life,
We're
believe
in
it or not,
trouble.
yeah, you might be. In real life, I'm an attorney. I have been for about 31 years. I'm in my 32nd year now, since it is now March.
Ah,
Um, so that's fun. I work mostly with small businesses, tax-exempt entities, um, some estate planning and intellectual property, mostly, primarily trademarks, and some copyright is inevitable. I've been on the board of four different not-for-profits, Chamber of Commerce, international educational, well, an international trade group, um, a my law school's alumni association board of trustees, and an international uh, educational foundation called the Space Court Foundation, which is located in Pennsylvania and Leiden, Netherlands. Uh, Despite that, I'm also a podcaster. And so this is where, I guess the saying that we're not all just one thing fits in, because I've always had sort of a chaotic brain in that I've been interested in a lot of things. Actually, my brain is not chaotic. My brain is linear, but I go in a lot of directions, and I have a very curious mind. So my family of shows is called the Garden of Thought, though until a couple weeks ago, there was a show called Garden of Doom, which I actually have a registered trademark for and had a fight with not really fight, but negotiate with the people who made the movie and video game Doom, and agree that I wasn't going to make a movie or a video game, which, I mean, sort of laughable considering I do this out of my, home office, which, in some places would be like the third bedroom.
right.
Um, but I recently rebranded it to Garden of Thought, which made the difference between Garden of Doom and Garden Views needless. Garden Views was the midweek show typically, and it was more like 48 hours type magazine show interviews. I realized I needed to make the change when I interviewed somebody who he was an activist that escaped from the Church of Scientology. Actually, he worked a lot with Leah Rimini from
Hmm,
King of Queens.
sure.
And I'm like, this interview really shouldn't have been on Garden of Doom. And when I got the retired chief of the NYPD, Joseph Borelli, to come on my show right after the Netflix docuseries on the Son of Sam dropped, and he was the detective that led that, as well as the first World Trade Center bombing, a couple of high-profile rabbinical deaths, and also the kids that ran across the Bell Parkway and they were chased, and a couple of them died. Some very high-profile cases. And so I created Garden Views for that. It was also on his 90th birthday, and his family was having a surprise party for him later in the day. But he's the chief of NYPD detectives. He knew that they had a party planned for him. He that's news he broke on my show, as well as they used the psychic in the Son of Sam, and that while she didn't really help in solving the case, she did provide information that turned out to be very accurate, and they were baffled by it because it was different than the pattern of all of the other things. But I'm not going to tell anyone what it is. You're going to have to go back and listen to that show, which was probably like 4.5 years ago.
Okay.
The
You don't have an episode number for me or anything, do
think it's well, it's Garden Views one. It's Garden Views
Oh,
episode one,
there
but
you go.
it's all on the Garden of Thought feed for everyone's inconvenience.
Okay.
Um, the third show is the most recent one and it's called GOT because Garden of Thought presents, and it's either the Book of Black or the Gospel of Thomas. That depends on who my co-host is. So my two normal co-hosts, if you consider them normal at all, is PJ Black, who was Justin Gabriel in the WWE for 5 years. He's been a professional wrestler from South Africa for 26 years, but he's been in Impact, he's been in Ring of Honor, New Japan. I mean, he's wrestled in, I think he said 77 countries. Um, and the other is Mr. Thomas, who is a member of the Bumaye Fight Club in Major League Wrestling. He's been in Chikara. He went through the Ring of Honor dojo, so he's been around the block as well. And then the legendary Lufisto is going to be a guest host at least once, and actually later this month. So hopefully she'll come back again, and then I'll have my sort of like my Avengers All Stars. Basically, we talk to people in and around wrestling, mostly about non-wrestling things, but with wrestlers, wrestling always comes into play. The show with PJs or Justin Gabriel, for those who only recognize one name. By the way, if you don't know Justin, there was a group called the Nexus in the late aughts, early 2010s, and basically for a while when John Cena had to be like the lackey to a bad guy group and wear a bright black T-shirt with a big N on it. That's the Nexus, and that was Justin was in the group. So was Brian Danielson, Daniel Bryan, Ryback, a couple of Wade Barrett. Some people graduated to honors with that one. Um, so it's mostly esoteric with him. With Mr. Thomas, it's definitely more current events or pop culture, or we're sort of all over the place and wherever the guest leads us, which sometimes is wacky places. And then we'll see with Lufisto. We don't know. We'll see because it hasn't happened yet. But she's awesome. So I'm going to pause here and see if you have any other questions for me. If you want me to pick up straight into the other
I th
wrestling podcast that I appear on.
I was gonna say I think you're doing beautifully. Really, I have no problem sitting here listening and letting you roll. So don't feel like you have to pause to let me talk or anything. I mean, you are carrying the show and you're doing a wonderful job of it. I'm just a little surprised. So you're a little bit of a wrestling fan, is what you're trying to tell everybody.
It's so weird. It's like something that most people grow out of, and I'm well aware that most people grow out of it. I never did until I was a grown up and was working too much for it. I always poke my nose, and I want to see who the champion were of the different organizations, but I didn't watch. I didn't really follow most of the storylines or anything like that. I mean, some. Then my kids got a little bit older, and there was like a 2 year period where they liked wrestling, so I got back into it. But they, like normal people, because they are normal people, grew out of it. So they stopped watching, and I went back to just, peeking, plugging away and just, peeking my nose into it. And then I had a major career setback, among other things. We're not going to talk about that this day, but if you ever want to invite me back, we can talk about that. But that'll
Okay.
sidetrack the show for like an hour.
All right.
Um, and in the course of that, I had a job that was really boring and really easy. And they didn't want you to overachieve because it would ruin the stats for everybody else. And so the expectations would be raised for people who couldn't keep up with the level that I could perform at, as could, some of the other people in the room, but not most. So somebody said, "You're sitting here and you're just doing nothing. How do you do this?" I go, "I don't know. What else am I supposed to?" And she's like, "Listen to podcasts." I'm like, I never really thought about that. So I started listening to podcasts and found the BBC News and a few other things, a couple science podcasts, this here and that, mythology podcasts, fun stuff, things that are on, Garden of Doom, Garden of Thought. And I'm like, I like wrestling. Maybe I should listen to some. So I, checked out some wrestling podcasts. They take a long time. There's always stuff going on. And they introduced me to the show called Lucha Underground, which was it was only on the air for 4 years. It was actually a TV show with seasons, and it was so remarkably pulp comic booky, fantastically ridiculous. Lorenzo Lamas had a recurring character role on it, which I mean, all I remember is Lorenzo Lamas was one of those guys who was famous, really famous. Then he wasn't. Then he had a syndicated show called Renegade, but then he broke up with his wife and that was over. And then he sort of disappeared and reappeared. But like he was sort of replaced by Antonio Sabato Jr., who got replaced by Dean Cain, who got replaced by Kevin Sorbo, and like, people who were famous for like 5 years kind of thing.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and PJ, as a matter of fact, he was on Lucha Underground, which was just a coincidence. Um, and that show just got me back into wrestling. And I'm so excited because the most recent episode that we dropped, maybe not by the time that this publishes, but
Yeah.
it's either the most recent Garden of Thought, the one that says El Jefe is with Luis Fernandez Hill, who's an actor he's a real actor. He's a recurring character on Curb Your Enthusiasm, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Punked, the show with Ashton Kutcher. But he's on Mayans, bunch of shows. But I know, I mean, I've seen him on like TV commercials where he's like a happy contractor getting insurance. And he was Dario Cueto, the evil promoter in Lucha Underground. And also later on, he played his own father in Lucha Underground after Dario was killed by mysterious means.
Mm.
A couple of years later, he got brought into Major League Wrestling, which is where Mr. Thomas works, as basically to resurrect the same character with a different name, so Cesar Duran. And the most recent episode, he doesn't do podcasts, but because of Thomas and because I'm so fantastic, he did. And that podcast, that episode is fantastic. He confirmed through not denial a plot change that was likely going to happen. He confirmed something else as well in that, and also revealed that there might have been almost a love connection on the set, but he was in a relationship at the time, but he's not now, and he just maybe he's going to get in touch with that other person. And it got there by a question where Tom's like, "Be careful. Where are you going, Jeff? Where are you going?" I go, "You got to trust me. I'm going somewhere with this." So, but the interviews start with him talking about his time in the Spanish military. So,
Wow.
that show, yeah. So that show, really excited. So of course, my one of my goals is to have everybody from Lucha Underground on the show. And PJ's been on. A guy named Fabulous B who moved to Australia but is American. Um, he's been on the show. And of course, we got the El Jefe himself, Dario Cueto. So feeling pretty good about my chances about getting the other 45 people or whatever that have been on the show, some of which speak, to this day speak no English.
So if you get El Jefe, you can get everybody else.
It probably doesn't work that way, but it certainly isn't going to hurt my chance. Some of them, a lot of people on the show have graduated to bigger promotions that actually have PR departments they must go through. So a lot of people from that show are in WWE or AEW now, which have pretty rigorous PR departments.
Sure.
Um, some are in TNA, which it's not as rigorous, but they probably still need to ask. And others they're just not going to be responsive right away, but they will. I mean, as I get more and more wrestlers, or as we get more and more wrestlers out there, and it gets known that it's sort of a friendly place and people are having a good time and referrals, so it's it'll get there. It's already on the cusp, I would say.
Now, how long you been doing this, Jeff?
Watching wrestling, which was the original question. The first match I saw was on ABC's Wide World of Sports. I think it was 1974. Whenever Muhammad Ali got embarrassed by Antonio Inoki, because Antonio Inoki just took his legs out and basically kept him in a leg lock, and Muhammad Ali couldn't do anything. It was really boring. But as a 4-year-old or whatever I was, 6, you're fascinated by anything. And then my father's like, there's wrestling on, and then so I watched wrestling, and then for the next 50 years plus, he's been telling me that, it's fake, right? I'm like, yeah, I sort of caught on to that, in like 1980. But yeah, um, so's that movie you just watched.
Right.
So was The Departed, which is a great movie, by the way. But
According to a
uh,
lot of folks, so's the NFL at this point. So
yeah, yeah, I hear it all, believe me. I mean,
I'm
Conspiracy
sure.
Central.
I'm sure.
Um, the podcasting part that came about because of the storytelling with the work. One of the podcasts I was listening to, I joined the Facebook group. A bunch of podcasts were sort of friendly with each other, but they had dropped their Facebook groups because, okay, fandoms are the worst, wrestling fans are the worst of the worst, and they were they just couldn't deal with it. All the fighting, all the fussing, all the fights, all this. So they just folded theirs and all went into this one person's. So I was in the group for 7 months. Didn't think that I was particularly well liked. Um, and there was a because the other podcasters felt like they were getting attacked, and the podcaster whose show it was, I'm not saying any names, liked them and wanted them to feel protected. He put a call out that he wanted two more moderators or two new moderators in this group of which had several thousand people in it. Um, and I didn't nominate myself. I didn't vote. I was there 7 months. I didn't think it was appropriate. There are people there for years. So apparently there were like 1,000 votes and like over 700 people voted for me. So um,
Wow.
someone said, "Well, will you do it?" I said, "Yes." And it ended up being like pretty much a 24/7 job, um, with really no reward, except I got to know a lot of people, some of which
Right.
I'm still friends with. Um, after, but as a result of that, one, I became friendly with some of the bigger podcasts that didn't have their own pages or groups. And one such podcaster who was tired of doing wrestling podcasts and tired of wrestling, period, to be frank, contacted me and said, "Do you want to do a non-wrestling podcast?" I said, "Sure." And this was right around when COVID started. Um, and he was picking up a hobby. He was gardening, and he was like naturally really good at it. He was having like enormous like success with it really quickly, posting, all of his gardening stuff. And then COVID sort of struck while we were in the planning stages. And at the beginning, it's just like, oh, Chinese bat flu, oh, and then you find out that like they locked down the city of Wuhan, which I'd never heard of before, but it has 11 million people in it. Then they locked down the entire province, which has 67 million people. And then you're like, yeah, I know China's strict, but that's like shutting down like Texas and like four of its neighbors. Um, that's so this is something. So we're feeling a little bit of doom, So garden of doom. That's where it came from. Um, we did he sort of lost interest in the show, I think, early on. I don't know if it's because he was expecting to be thousands of listeners overnight because he had that with his wrestling world,
Hmm.
and that wasn't happening. Uh, I don't know if it's that it was me. I don't know if that when we had a conversation what the show was, we heard the same words from each other but had very different visions, pretty, which is understandable and happens. But he sort of left me high and dry. But I decided to keep the show on, even though I'm a complete Luddite, and somehow, managed to learn how to use Spreaker, and my wife is a tech genius, so she was able to figure out Adobe Audition right away, and some of my audio stunk in the beginning, and so some of the older shows, like my first show with PJ was episode 50, great content, terrible audio. Um, and I didn't really know what to do with the show. I mean, I start going to my 6 degrees of separation to find guests. I went to a public school, but I have an amazing amount of people from my public school who went on to become really accomplished in a lot of areas. And so I called upon some of them, and some of them actually said yes. And as I was sort of feeling my oats and realizing what I've got to lose, I just asked people from podcasts I liked. So I asked Cliff Dunning from Earth Ancients. I asked Kristaps Sanderson from the Eastern Border. I asked Mike Hilliard from the Red Line podcast. I asked Sebastian Major from Our Fake History. And they said yes. I asked Andy from the History of Africa. He said yes. People, I was expecting to go 10%, and I was going like 40 or 50% of people saying yes. And from there, I sort of stumbled upon a, I made a silly joke in an ESPN fantasy football thread on Twitter where Stefania Bell was standing next to like a very tall Nigerian basketball player. And she's like, "How ridiculous does this look?" Because she looks like she's 3 feet tall. Yes, she is short. And I said, it's not strange to me. My family is half Nephilim. And somebody said to me, they said, "If you're really into the Nephilim, you should check this out." And they gave me a connection to the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. So I contacted them. Lo and behold, they contacted me. So I became their their unofficial, then their official podcaster. So and they've had rotating guests, and guests beget guests, and some of them have,
Yeah.
have had TV shows on Discovery and Gaia and Earth Ancient, not Earth, well, yeah, Earth Ancients, but Ancient Astronauts and all sorts of stuff. So, but I've also like I listened to a bunch of the great courses, and I reached out to some of those professors. So I don't want people to think it's all woo-woo because I've had like four professors from the great courses. John White from Crackenford, which is a Indo-European mythology podcast with 200,000 listeners. He's been on the show three times, coming on again. I've had guy who wrote The Secret. I've had New York Times bestsellers in fiction and nonfiction. The guy who drew the graphic novels, The Olympians and The Asgardians. He's been on the show. So it it it's been a ride. You'd be surprised what you can do if you just ask. If you're a little bit persistent, but people can tell you don't take yourself too seriously. Um, and I don't know. I like to think that if people want to listen, give my shows a chance, they can probably drop 10 podcasts out of their lives if they were looking to free some time and just uh, and go through because I feel like I'm giving the most interesting encyclopedia to the world
So
out
they can
there.
streamline their listening pleasure by just listening to your stuff. That's quite the hook. You've got the sales angle of this down. That's great.
Well, I don't, which is why I have to do this promotional tour. Now, I would come on this show no matter what. I love going on other podcasts, obviously.
Yeah, no, you're a great guest. I'm telling you, man. You know your story. You're like into it. You're rocking. Do you want to tell
Who
everybody
else
about
would know
your?
it but me? I mean, you want to ask my ex-wife, it'll be a very different story.
I don't think it's that. It's not that kind of podcast right
Right.
now. Yeah. Do you want to tell everybody about your new show, or do we want to keep that under wraps for a little while? You can release it later.
Well, no, I'm fine to talk about this. I'm super excited about it, but
Okay.
there is still a bit of a question mark, and I would say in perforation because all the important pieces there. All right, so probably when will this show likely drop?
More than likely in the next 3 weeks, I would say.
Okay, so by the time this show drops, certainly the show the Garden of Thought GOT presents Gospel of Thomas. Yes, Mr. Thomas was the co-host. Will drop with our guest, who's an independent wrestler named Shaza McKenzie.
Okay.
And she's currently single. And because Thomas is that way, and everyone loves Thomas, he's like, so how's the dating life going? And we got into that. I'm not going to give too much away, but we started joking about like there should be like a bachelorette type of show or dating game, for wrestlers. But and she was sort of into it, and then we started going through what her criteria were and things like that. And as it turns out, she really was interested in doing it, if for fun, if nothing else, but maybe it'll work out. Why not? Try something different. And so, of course, I confirmed with her the next day she was serious. She was. She's really cool. She's very laid back. She's Australian because, like, people in Australia, they're just like more cool than we are generally. Um,
They have a cooler
and
accent than we do, that's for sure. Yeah.
cooler accent. Um, and so. Yeah, I'm coming up with this concept on the fly. So I decided that like I should probably be the host because I want everyone else to be a semi-celebrity. So yeah, Mr. Thomas will be one of the judges. That's easy, right? I asked her if she wanted to have one of her friends. By the way, they're not judges. So I'm going to call them advocates. But an advocate can advocate for or against a candidate, and right now, as I conceive it, an advocate has one save per season. That if she, votes somebody off the island, we can save them once if
Okay.
we think they're meritorious. But she's the only ultimate judge. Um, so her friend Lainey Luck, who's also an independent wrestler, these are obviously stage names, has agreed to be another judge. We haven't figured out who the third judge is, but somebody has expressed an interest. If not, we'll find someone. There'll probably be another professional wrestler or someone who's got a big following in and around that world. Um, and then I realized, whoa, I don't want a Craigslist murder on my hands. So like, I don't know how to vet the contestants. So, so I'm sort of trying to put out feelers that way to do it. So right now the only question mark is how do I find eligible contestants? So I I have found probably two, through my own means, which is fine because 8 to 12 is probably more than enough. I mean, this is, we can't do this forever. Everyone's got busy schedules, especially independent wrestlers. They have to take bookings, and sometimes they have to travel and stuff like that. So it'll be hard to coordinate it as it is. Um, so I contacted some matchmakers, and one said no because her clients come to her for privacy. Okay, makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Um, One, I think, is still trying to figure out exactly how she gets paid out of it. And I'm like, well, if you have male clients, wouldn't they pay you anyway for the services? This might be an unorthodox way of doing it, but it's not that much crazier than speed dating. And at least I'll be on a show with, people who have tens of thousands of followers. Um, so she hasn't said no yet. Another hasn't responded yet. And another is a friend of mine from here who she can't directly help because I'm on the East Coast, so we're looking for the Midwest, so basically greater St. Louis area. So hey, if you're single and you want to know what the criteria are, you can contact me and I'll tell you what the criteria are. They're, they're, they're stringent, but they're not unattainable, if you're of a reasonable age and led a decent life. Um, and also in our little podcaster Facebook group, someone showed up today, I think, with the idea of promoting podcast, revenue or whatever, something like that. I'm not exactly sure. But in her self-description, she said she was a professional matchmaker for 26 and a half years. So I'm like,
Wow.
serendipity. So I immediately PM'd her and we're gonna talk hopefully within the next 24 hours. And if that, yeah, and if she is into the idea and if she thinks that she can help, maybe she'll be the fourth judge, if she wants to be on there, or we can, and as part of whoever helps with this, whether it's a professional matchmaker or otherwise, part of the deal will obviously be I will plug them as sponsors, but they don't have to pay a thing. They've done something. Um, so if you're a
Wow.
matchmaker, or folks, if you're a single man in the St. Louis area or willing to travel to the St. Louis area at least a few times, um, for a 36-year-old woman, listen, you can Google Shaza McKenzie. You could see pictures and you can see what she looks like, and then she's in shape and all that, and got no kids. And, I mean, there is a divorce, but there's no kids, and it's not a messy divorce. So, you can do your own due diligence. I'm the one who's got to do the due diligence on you, or to the extent that I possibly
Right.
can. So,
That is
so
quite a project you've put together here.
isn't it just, and it just came out of an interview that we did literally Monday night, and today is Friday evening. So I think I've made pretty good progress for someone who's never produced, a TV show before. This probably won't be on
Yeah.
TV. It probably won't even stream on YouTube. It should. I really need to figure out if we can
Hey,
do
you
that.
never know.
Well, the
You never know.
visual, I think, is important.
If you
But
build it,
through
they may come, man.
That's right.
Sometimes.
Maybe there's a network out there that wants to pick me up right now. Though I'm very loyal to Wrestling Soup, who's done more for me than they should, given that most of my shows are not wrestling, even though they
Ah,
know me from wrestling.
okay. That's great.
Yeah.
When you first got started with all this stuff and you started doing the podcast stuff, now you're an attorney. Was that
Mhm.
an easy switch over? Was it more like, hobby and something you were just really, really interested in doing? Or, did you like say, hey, I'm going to turn this into a business. I'm going to invest some money, buy a whole bunch of stuff. What was your start like when you first got into this?
I tripped, fell, stumbled, and bumbled into it. I mean, I was really hoping that the guy who recruited me was going to do most of the heavy lifting, and in fact, he was doing most of the heavy lifting, and he knew he was going to do the. I mean, I told him I'm a
Nice.
tech idiot. I don't know anything. I mean, so over time. He said, dude, you really need to get a better microphone. So I got a better microphone. Now I have three. Um, I got this HD camera at some point, not for that, but for another network that I was on for a while. Actually, I've been on that network twice, for wrestling shows, to have an HD camera for their visual quality. I still have a full-time job. I mean, it's just, but I have sort of a non-traditional attorney job. So my hours and time are very controlled. Um, I'm on a second marriage. My wife has a almost 26-year-old son who lives with us, so is my stepson. Um, so, when he's only been here 2 out of the last 3 years. So, he still needs a lot of her attention. Um, she is a burgeoning TikTok star. So if you want to, at Pandora 694, you can follow her under Valentina. Now, it's probably would benefit you if you speak Spanish and if you like Feng Shui, but that's mostly what she's doing. And she's a stone cold fox, and you won't believe it if you see me that I found her. Or like all I can say is that Marduk provides, or insert deity of your choice there. Um, but
Wow. Okay.
I I'm extremely organized, so it actually I don't know. I've had real problems. I've been divorced. I've been in class action suits. I handled a case volume of 600 files at a time. I managed over 100 people. The- had and still have, but now it's manageable. It wasn't like a disease. So it's like, um, I've had real problems. This is just time management. That's easy. My own kids are both grown. The youngest is 21. They're employed. One lives in Florida, so I mean, I'm in the Baltimore area, so it's you know it's it, I have time. I have time, and this is fun. So I've got my little cyber world. She's developing her little cyber world as well, and we're both having a lot of fun doing what we're doing. And then at the end of the day, we talk to each other about like whatever fun stuff we've done that day. Or sometimes I just go in there and I just keep quiet and I just watch her doing a live or see her answering all the messages or all the things that are going on. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome. With her being, a social media star like that, I'm sure she,
Yeah.
understands why you want to be a podcaster. So sounds like you both are very supportive of each other.
I She's always been supportive of me. This thing with TikTok is new. She should have been doing it for years. She briefly had a YouTube channel and she had a 1 hour interview with Lanny Poffo, who, if people don't know, Lanny Poffo is Macho Man Randy Savage's brother, who also did pretty well for himself. But he was always Macho Man Randy Savage's brother. And she's from Ecuador, and Lanny moved to Ecuador. So I said, "Oh, you should contact him." And she's like, "He's not going to answer." He answered in 3 seconds. I mean, it might have been 30 seconds, but right away. And so somewhere out there, there's an hour-long conversation with them where he doesn't really understand her English and she doesn't really understand his Spanish. And he's just looking down her cleavage, which I don't blame him for. So.
Okay. I mean, it's good that you're open-minded like that. If she's on TikTok, she's probably getting looked at quite a bit. So I understand.
I'm
That's how it goes.
56. When people are looking at my 50-year-old wife like she's a 25-year-old stone cold fox, and she is, I'm not going to be jealous about it. I'm going to be like, yay me.
That's right. Hey, good for you. It sounds
Yeah.
like you outkicked your coverage. That's fantastic. Wonderful,
I
wonderful.
might have ran to a different field entirely.
Very good. I love it. Now, podcast guesting. You said you love being guests on other podcasts.
Love it.
And that's a great way to promote your projects and what you're doing. Is that primarily how you promote your stuff, or do you do other things to promote your podcast?
I mean, I use social media, but I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok, even for her. So yeah, I promote it. I don't know how much effect that has. I'm in a bunch of groups that you think would be interested in it, and some are, and I found a lot of guests in those groups, and some of those people have become friends and whatnot, and it's fun. But yeah, I mean, people are going to find it or they're not. Reviews help probably more than anything else. Personal referrals help more than anything else. Having great guests, I mean, whenever Gary Wayne is on, the listens triple. Whenever Professor White is on from Greg and Ford, the listens double. And you hope to keep some percentage of them for forever. But yeah, now I'm doing this promotional tour. Viv's been with me on a couple of shows, some of the like dating or love shows,
Hmm.
and just talking about like whatever anybody wants me to talk about. But thing is, like most of the guesting I've done have been primarily on wrestling shows, so it's like I'm promoting to the same people generally. It's like the,
Sure,
the same people who are from Wrestling Soup are probably listening or watching Pro Wrestling Time. They're probably also listening to the Drew Yara Experience. They probably
sure.
watched Tooneytown Wrestling for the 3 weeks I was on it. So it's a little bit of dating your sister, but if you get three or four or five or six or 10 or 15 people from whatever group or network you're on who, for whatever reason, like you or they like you after the third time hearing you and they follow you around. And people say, your podcast is one of my must listens every week. And I'm like, great, but there's three a week. And they're like, yeah, 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 all three of them. It's hard to keep up.
That's great for
I
the,
know I know it's hard to keep up, but most of them are evergreen, so don't worry.
yeah, exactly. No, that's great, but we have three a week. Oh, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Oh, no, that's good. That's good to know. All right.
Two of them we
Yeah, I
try to
know.
keep to about an hour or less. Garden of Doom can generally can well, Garden of Thought now the weekend show. It's generally probably around 90 minutes, but the midweek show and the wrestling show they're both usually around an hour.
Well, it only takes one show, one time to get picked up by one person, who's the right person. And the next thing you know, all the wheels start to come off. You know what I mean? So it's just keep plugging, man. That's exactly what you got to do sometimes is just put your head
All right,
down and
Christopher,
keep guesting and keep rolling, right?
yeah, Christopher Nolan, Tom Hanks, Brad Pitt, Kevin Feige. Where are you? Not George R. R. Martin. I've said a lot of bad things about George R. R. Martin.
You're not a GOT fan, huh?
Oh, I was absolutely a GOT fan. I read 5,500 pages, and I've been waiting, what, 12 years for page 5,501. But I really was not a fan at that point because at at the end of page one, I felt closer to the conclusion of the story than I felt at the end of page 5,500. So, that shouldn't be the case. And
No,
apparently he didn't really know how to wrap it up either because it's taken so many years and he's, involved with House of Dragon and then and Westeros or Winterfell Origins and he did Dark Winds and he's doing all sorts of other projects to pretend he's busy. Any day now, it's coming out any day.
right. Well, hey, as long as people keep paying you, you just keep churning stuff out. Well, why not? Let's see what you
Yeah,
can put out there.
we'll turn out the thing that everybody wants. Listen, we all know Jon Snow is supposed to be Robert Baratheon's eldest bastard son, and that's what Ned Stark was protecting. We figured it out by now. Thanks. Just wrap up the story.
Yeah, clearly he's
Not
the heir to
whatever.
everything.
Yeah, not whatever they did in those last 3 years or whatever of Game of Thrones, where they made him a Targaryen, and had them in some sort of Oedipal Electra kind of thing, and one dragon ran away and the other two died. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it was a little loose fitting at the end there. That's, that's good. Listen, on all these podcasts that you do, but especially Garden of Thought, which seems to, kind of be your apex in there. Have you had the opportunity to monetize these? Has that been something you've wanted to do or tried to do, and have you been successful with it?
Um, well, Spreaker inserts ads. So Spreaker's my host. So Spreaker inserts ads. So there's ad revenue from that.
Hmm.
Um, have I done anything else? No. I haven't
Okay.
looked for sponsors. I haven't done a Patreon. I'm sort of active on X, and on X, especially in the wrestling world, if you do anything for money, they call you a grifter. And I sort of take pride. I'm like, I don't even pay for certified blue check mark. I don't have a Patreon. I don't do super chats. I don't monetize anything. Um, so, so while I'm not money averse, I haven't I don't do this for money. I also don't want failure. And if I started doing it for money, then I know me, it would never be enough. So I would always feel, if I got 5,000 listeners, I want 50,000 listeners. If I had 50,000, I want 500,000. If I had 500,000, then I'd want 1.5 million. And it's good to have drive, but I'm almost 57. So the, this is a hobby. This is a fun hobby. I have learned so much. I have um, met so many people, made so many, cyber friends that, are, sort of are real friends in so many corners that, academia, science, writers, authors, content creators, from everywhere from Hollywood content creators to people like you and me. Um, I do a UFL podcast with my son called the Lippman on the UFL with my 24-year-old. We'll start season two because it's season two for the UFL, and we do that on somebody else's network. So maybe they monetize it. We don't care, but it's something we can do together, and it's the
That's
ground
cool.
floor. And then we immediately started collaborating with some other podcasts there too. And one of them, as it turns out, he signed a deal with Spotify this year. He's a record deal. He's got music out on Spotify. He's like a rapper. I had no idea. He's just a good guy that organized the UFL podcast and has been a guest on the show and completely non-imposing and and had no idea, and it's just like, maybe he's going to be a big shot. I don't know. So
That's great.
yeah,
I mean, great for him. The
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I asked about monetizing. You said you were a lawyer, so I'm
Mhm.
guessing you're doing okay. But a lot of podcasters are, asking themselves that question. So it's great that you can keep it as something you do for fun. There's nothing wrong with doing something for fun, that's for sure. But
Right.
there are a lot of podcasters out there that are really looking for that monetization clip. So I always ask the question, just to see if
No,
anybody has any new ideas.
it's a fair question. I mean, there's 4.5 million podcasts out there, and I'm well aware that, many of them never make it to episode two, many of them never make it to episode
Right.
10. And there's, it's closer to, 10% that are active, which means more than something like 5 shows a year or whatever. But that's still 420,000 podcasts, which is also competing with radio,
Hmm.
depending on who you are, YouTube, streaming, TV, cable, life, sleep, everything else. I mean, and all celebrities have come. Like, the thing about podcasting in the beginning is that you could become a success because nobody else was in it. Well, now all the celebrities figured that out about 6 or 7 years ago. So everyone from Tori Spelling to, everyone. They have, athletes have podcasts. Everyone has podcasts. So, they're
Right.
all going to get, no matter who they are, they're going to get tens of thousands of people. I mean, so I don't know. I'm mystified that people still want to do podcasts. I see lots of podcasts where people are coaching or they want to tell their inspirational story, and their stories are certainly beautiful, but I don't know. Like, everyone has an inspirational story. Lots of people do. Or, like, if everybody's a coach, who are they coaching? I mean, so uh, I, I don't know. Everyone out there that does this, ignore me. I don't know anything. Clearly, I've been doing this for 5 years, haven't made a dollar, so I have no idea what it takes to be a success. Ignore everything I've said about any of that. You're all going to kill it.
Appreciate that that nod of confidence there at the end. That's
To the
great.
world.
That's great. I always ask this one corny question of all my guests. It's kind of like, the Arnold Schwarzenegger "I'll be back" thing. So I just want
Mhm.
to make sure I get it in. And it's a little trite, but I get a lot of good answers from it. In your podcasting that you do, doesn't matter what show, but in the podcasting itself, what is it about podcasting that you love the most? And what is it about podcasting that you just absolutely cannot stand, that you hate the most?
The tech. I hate the tech. I hate that I cannot independently do this. I hate that I
There you
don't
go.
know that I cannot figure out how to use Adobe Audition. I hate that there are times where the person sounds loud and clear and crisp to me through Zoom, and somehow when it translates to Adobe Audition, it sounds like they're whispering. I do not, I don't know how that happens. I don't know how to fix that kind of thing. I hate that to no end. What I love is what I said. I mean, I really did come into this because I was curious about just like a few things, and I didn't really know how to go about finding them. And I feel like I've answered almost all the questions I had, but questions lead to other questions. You peel an onion, you keep peeling. And I've
Sure.
had so many different onions. I've got so many different things I'm peeling that, but so there's always new things. Like, I didn't know that I mean, I think vaguely I knew there was something called a Yazidi, but I didn't know it was like an ancient religion and was still practiced. Well, now I'd like to get a Yazidi on. I would like to learn about the Yazidi. And that came about because we did a show on, I knew that the peacock imagery was everywhere, and I wanted to know why. So we did a show on the peacock imagery, and a lot of that came from, or started with Indian and the Yazidi. And and I vaguely knew Rastafarianism was like a religion of sorts, but I don't know anything about it. So I would like to find a Rastafarian who's willing to tell me about Rastafarianism. I thought Beta Israelites and Black Israelites were the same. They are not. I spoke to the Black Israelites. They made that very clear. So I would like to talk to someone in the Beta Israelites to see what that's all about, and things. And there's also really boring things. There's some really boring things that I'm interested in that I don't think like, what's the difference between a hill and a mountain? What's the difference between a creek, a stream, a brook, and a river? how do you decide what's a bay or a cay, or when something is a sea versus a gulf? Like I would like to know those types of things that that I think that most people would find really boring. Like, how do you know when a continent ends? When it's just all sorts of stuff like that. I know the basics, but I mean, it's sort of on tectonic plates, and we haven't been able to drill lower than 11 miles into the earth. We don't really know where the plates. It's all done through uh, reading basically magnetic gravitational waves and how they move differently through different materials, and so you can measure it. Um, but we don't know how things get distorted through there. But I don't know. There's a whole universe out there of things to be curious about.
I love that. It's another very unique answer to that question. So I'm going to keep asking it. We're still on a roll.
Okay.
Listen, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming down here, telling us about your podcast, sharing all your thoughts, and just letting everybody get to know you a little bit, which has been great. Thank you for coming on the show. I usually end with at least with one question, and that is, you've been doing this for a minute. So you've encountered some things, you've overcome some obstacles. What's one piece of advice you have for a podcaster who, wants to keep on going, wants to make it? They're not quite where you are yet, but they want to be.
If they want to do it, the only thing I can say that's at all intelligent is do it for yourself. If you're not doing it for yourself, I, you know, I don't see like a giant market available for, unless you get really lucky, and everyone wants to get lucky, but only a few people win the lottery, and even a lot of those people end up squandering the money. Um, so do it for you. If you do it for you, you're not going to lose. You're going to win. This is a very inexpensive hobby. How many of us don't spend 5 or 10% of our income on, recreation or hobbies? It's cheaper than going bowling once a week. It's cheaper than gambling on the horses or going to a casino. It's cheaper than losing to your friends in cards. I know you always win, but it's cheaper than it's cheaper than having a girlfriend. I tried that once. Um, uh,
Don't you have a wife?
well, I had a different wife then.
Ah,
So this wife is not involved at all in any of that.
I got you. I
I
totally
said
understand.
once.
All right.
I'm
Now I
50, I'm
understand.
57. I've lived a couple lives in that time.
I stand corrected. I love it. All right. That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that too.
Mhm.
Jeff, thank you for coming on the program. I mean, I haven't laughed, this much in a while. I mean, you're an unbelievably entertaining guy to be on. And I love the way your mind works, man. I really do. It's a
Thank
lot of
you.
fun talking to you. And thank you for being on
Appreciate
the
that.
show today, man. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for that. I mean, I'm blushing. Thank you.
All right, folks. Jeff Lippman, host of Garden of Thought, family of shows, and all the wrestling shows we talked about, and possibly a bachelorette type show in the future. Keep your eyes open with uh, Shazah,
Shaza McKenzie,
Shaza,
Shazza McKenzie, just the way you would.
Shaza McKenzie. All right, well, we'll keep our eyes open for that one too,
If you're in the
folks.
St. Louis area and you're an eligible single male and good career, health insurance, U.S. citizen, no criminal record, I need contestants.
We're still looking for matches. There we go. Still looking for guys to come out and check it out.
A
All
different
right,
kind of match. Different
do
kind of match for Shaza.
right. Do so at your own risk, gentlemen.
Well,
We're,
she can beat you up,
there we
probably.
go. Folks, you've sat through another fantastic episode of the Podcaster Nation, and I do appreciate it. This is the podcast that is about podcasters. It's for podcasters. It's done by podcasters. This is the place where the rising tide consistently raises all ships. So keep sailing.